Welcome to Moments with Marianne. Allow me to interrupt your train of thought with something that may be one of the most interesting things you hear today. This is Marianne Pastana, and we're here today with our special guest, Dr. Karen Herrick, and she's here to share with us her book, Psychology of the Soul and the Paranormal. So let's welcome to the show, Dr. Herrick.
Thank you so much.
What an honor it is to have you here and to talk about this book. I think probably the best place to start here is from the beginning. What got you interested in the line of work that you do?
Well, let's see. My father was an alcoholic. I married and divorced an alcoholic. And I went back to college and took an alcohol minor in my master's at Rutgers, which was the only university in the United States at that time that had an alcohol minor. And I realized, wow, I lived this, and then not knowing that people from alcoholic and or dysfunctional homes, their emotional needs were not met, and they mostly came from trauma. And so in trauma, it means that you disassociate as a child and living in this house, where they're yelling and screaming and you just think you're at the beach and try to forget. Now, because of that, I had disassociated also. And then all the people that came to me, they had too. Not that we talked about that a lot, but now what has happened is that people have realized that when you disassociate as a child, then you are, as an adult, more able to have spiritual experiences, or what other people would just call weird things that happen. And we don't tell anybody because we're afraid they'll think we're crazy. But I realize now that's why most of the people that came to me had an interest in the paranormal or spirituality, and I did too. So that's, I think, why I got so many of them, which was really fun. So I've just tried to educate them. And my biggest thing when they first came was to show them about that we have an unconscious and that your unconscious has complexes. And I have a diagram where I show what the unconscious looks like and the consciousness. And they seem to get that, they were coming here in order to lower that line between consciousness and unconsciousness. And from the diagram, and we just worked together and people got better. I mean, not everybody, I'm not claiming 100%, but people did get better. And I know that because I get so many Christmas cards every year saying, thank you, thank you. But the whole point was that then I started getting people in chronic grief. And, you do all the work in grief and it's very difficult really because these people are so depressed because they've lost their loved ones. And, and then sometimes they're still in chronic grief, like 8 or 9 months later. So I started, I'd always been interested in the paranormal. So I'd gone to psychics and mediums. And I started knowing in my area who I could put on a list to refer people to. And I would encourage them, the ones in chronic grief, to please go to mediums and see if their loved ones would come in and talk to them. Because so many people, too, in this chronic grief situation have so much guilt about what they did or didn't do. And guilt is, I believe, just supposed to be at the time that you do something. And then your conscious comes in and says, oh, I don't want to do that. And I won't do that again. But I don't have to feel guilty the rest of my life for it. However, it's very difficult to tell people that in chronic grief. That is supposed to be, just something we learn from, right? So they would go and they would come back and their grief was lightened. And when you go to a medium, you cannot predict who's going to come. However, from what I know about the other side, they want you to know they're okay. And they don't want you to grieve because that doesn't help them where they are. They don't want you to be chronically crying and upset, and because they're up there and they're feeling a great release from their body and enjoying kind of flying around and their new world that is a rebirth for them. And they want you to understand they're all right. So mostly my people, they had, their loved ones come in, or like I remember one gentleman and his wife had died quickly, which is the hardest grief when you're not expecting them to go. And I said, well, you lost your parents last year and you lost an aunt and uncle and now your wife. And I said, somebody's going to come into you. because they're all up there watching you, and I was helping him with parenting skills too that he wasn't used to using. So anyway, he went and he walked in here, and Marianne, his shoulders were down. He was like, oh, he was so much more relaxed because his wife had come in, and she told him what to do with the kids and told him it wasn't his fault, and on and on. So when you have those kinds of people that are really feeling better, and they're feeling better, and that yet our culture says, oh, don't go to these crazy mediums because you don't know what'll happen. And well, you do have to, as with anything else, if you pick out a plumber, you got to ask around. So you have to ask around about mediums and psychics. And of course, mediums talk to the deceased, and psychics are who you go to when you want to find your keys or the money grandma left, somewhere in the house before we sell the house. So that's my story, I guess, of how I got here, just quickly.
Well, thank you for going over that, because I've just found your background to be so fascinating, especially because right now it seems like we're going through kind of this surge of people who are having problems with alcohol, because people have been home so long, and, it was so much easier for them just to drink at home. And now we are hearing about how that's becoming more of a problem. And I mean, you have over 30 years of experience. You know what you're doing here, So
Right.
when you wrote this book, Psychology of the Soul and the Paranormal, what inspired you to write it?
Oh, well, then I had a spiritual experience where I went to this conference and they were doing holotropic breath work, which I had no idea what that was. But education is the thing that has really sent me over the moon in my life. So I went because many people had recommended this. And so you lay down to music, and the music activates your chakra system, which is your energy system in your body, which is invisible. So anyway, it was just psychology, mostly Jungian psychology, which I believe in now is the best psychology that really helps people, because Jung believed there was a higher power and that you had a soul, and that your whole purpose for living is to find out what your soul purpose is. And that's what people have a hard time doing, even believing they have a soul, even though most religions tell you that. But then what am I supposed to do? Well, you're supposed to connect your soul to your personality, because that's what makes you the happiest, is when they're both working together. So anyway, I had this spiritual experience where I lay down and I was breathing, and they did a meditation and they said, don't think, just breathe. Well, now, if you come from a dysfunctional home, you think, because that's how you stay in control. And so it was the first time I'd been told not to think, just relax. And then you had this breathing that you did, which was kind of like the yoga breath, which is what I do with the vagus nerve now. And people breathe in shorter, like to the count of 4, and then you breathe out as far as you can go. And that calms down this 10th and longest nerve in your body. But right then, we were just breathing to get into an altered state of consciousness, which really worked for me because I was all in. I felt this breath come in and go out my mouth. And I thought, oh my God, I'm a channel. And I thought, whose breath is that? And then I thought, don't think, just breathe. So we just breathed together. I breathed, and this breath breathed. And anyway, when I got up, we were at this conference with like 21 other people. And I had thought they were really strange because they're talking about reincarnation and Carl Jung and all this stuff that I really didn't know about then. But I knew I was connected to every one of them. And I knew we were connected to everybody in the world. And I knew there was a God. Now, when I was raised in my house, my father was Protestant, my mother was Catholic. She never went back to the Catholic Church. And that was never finalized in her life. And so I kept hearing about these differences, and you had Catholic relatives and Protestant relatives. And so I figured by the time I was 8, God wasn't interested in us because it was a mess down here. And I don't know, I believed that there was the wind, something like the American Indians probably, that there was a force, and I believed in nature, because I came from upstate New York, which is beautiful. And I would walk in the woods a lot. So anyway, that was my idea. But then I knew there was a God. So then what you did was you didn't talk to anybody, and had all this wonderful, awe-inspiring feelings. It was just phenomenal. I wish they had videoed, the breathing and everything. But anyway, then you're supposed to go draw a picture. And you draw this picture in a circle, which is a Jungian mandala. And so I drew a flower and grass and the sun and, kind of a, second grade picture. And then you go to lunch. Now, I thought this whole thing had taken about 20 minutes, but it actually had taken 4 hours. So I was in an altered state of consciousness. You lose your sense of time and space. And we went to lunch and we came back and everybody explained their pictures. And the professor looked at my picture and said, "Oh, that's a rebirth drawing. You had a rebirth." I thought, okay. Now, nobody in our little group here had talked about having another breath. So I didn't want to look stupid. So I didn't mention that. And it took me about a year and a half to figure out that I had a spiritual experience. And Bill Wilson, the founder of Alcoholics Anonymous, when he got down on his knees in the hospital room and prayed, "Please, God, take away my desire to drink," not even believing there was a God, he said a light filled the room and this breath went through him. And I thought, yeah, that's what I had. So it was really a Holy Spirit intervention, I guess, which isn't like very popular now, but that's what happened. And then I started getting people really weird experiences. And I thought, if we've had these things happen to us, then I need to get a doctorate in what is a spiritual experience. So I did. I got a doctorate in now, and my thesis was entitled Naming Spiritual Experiences. And I had 130 some people that were therapists that I gave a pre-test and a post-test to, and then like an hour and a half lecture. I did all this at different conferences and found out that most therapists had a spiritual experience themselves, and their clients have had them, but psychology doesn't recognize them. So, that's one of the reasons, I'm really big on what Mr. Bigelow did in Las Vegas, having this contest where he asked people, what is your research on, is there immortality? And I did submit an essay, was not chosen, but 1,300 people applied and 204 people gave an essay. So now I get to read those essays, 29 winners, and the first prize guy got $500,000. So I'm very thankful that somebody like Mr. Bigelow in Las Vegas, who I guess must have had a lot of loss in his life, would want to know, is there life on the other side? Because that's what I know. And then, so my book shows you illustrations on leaving your physical body and your astral body and how it actually works. So my news to everybody is we have two bodies as humans. You have your physical and you have your spiritual body. And it says that in the Bible. St. Paul says you have a natural body, and which is your physical, and a spiritual body. You come in on the natural and you leave on the spiritual, which is true. So that's how I got interested in all of that. And now, people come for sure because they say, "Karen, this is what happened to me. What do you think? What's it called?"
Oh my goodness. Well, and it's so interesting the experiences that people have when they have what they call, like, I'm doing like air quotes, like their awakening or their
Yes.
transformation, because it's different for everybody.
Yes.
Now, do you find that when you started your work, and because your book in chapter 1, you start off with the soul,
Yes.
so do you find that that was like the number one question people had? It's like, okay, I know I have a soul, but what does it do? Why, what, what is that supposed to mean?
Right. Well, because I was teaching Jung. Jung has a diagram for the unconscious, much different than Freud just said. It's all sexuality and what happened in your house. So that's it. There's nothing else. But Jung said the first thing was your life. Second layer was your parents' life. How did that affect you? The third layer was your DNA. What did your ancestors do? And what didn't they finish? Because what they didn't finish means that you have that job now to finish it in your family. And then the fourth layer was your culture or your country. How did that affect you? And your fifth layer was your soul. So that is what you're supposed to find in therapy, in breaking down from the conscious to the unconscious, so that eventually you get rid of all this stuff coming in here, talking to me, beating on pillows and all that kind of stuff, that your soul's going to come up and join with your personality. And what does that mean exactly? It means that you live a more spiritual life with more loving concern for others, the golden rule, or somebody said the other day, the platinum rule, which means you don't do what you think you would want, you do what they want. If you're really caring and loving. And that's an interesting thing, the platinum rule. So anyway, that's how we got to the soul. And then lots of people say, well, what does that mean? Well, I think what it means is that you live very loving life, um, and you do have a passion about something. And I see that with some of my friends who are going to retire, and they don't really have a passion. So I'm thinking, don't retire, because this job is it for you right now. And if you retire, you're going to be lost until you find a passion, which is what I say. Well, find a passion. And they just look at me,
Well, they make such a big difference when the work you do is a passion, because then it's not work. We're just enjoying life as we go.
Yes, that's right. And that's true. So anyway, I'm in my fourth act. So what I'm trying to do is get all my books cataloged after 35 years, 40 years, and kind of get everything together here. And the paranormal book was trying to explain to everybody, hey, you can do this. You can, if you have some illustrations. There've been people since 19 or 1800s leaving their body, and they've all written books about it. And so you could leave your body and know what it is to die, which is what happens with the near-death people. They go up there, and if you've ever been to a near-death experience or conference, they're the happiest people you've ever met, because they've died and come back. And they know what it's like up there. There's this light, and you meet your deceased relatives, and everything's pretty cohesive and just positive. There's no black and white up there. It's just positive. So I wanted more people to know about that, and really that's what therapy is for, is to find your soul, not just to get over, I don't know, having a mother-in-law you don't like. You know what I mean?
I'm sure there are a lot of people out there that understand that. Well, and in your book, you really kind of dive into what's the difference. You talk about the ego, and you're explaining what the soul is. Why don't you share a little bit of that for our listeners that are maybe kind of going, okay, well, what's the difference?
Okay, well, your ego, number one, your ego doesn't believe there's anything that you have an unconscious. So you actually have to teach your ego, hey, there's stuff down there. So a mother complex, a father complex, an inferiority complex, an incest complex. I mean, all these things that happen to you just are divided into those complexes. And but your ego doesn't believe any of that. So for instance, you could go on in life if you just were ego driven. And what do people want? They want material things. They want the house. They want all this stuff that you're supposed to have in the American dream. But and they can get it any way they want. There's really no conscience about it. So when you add your soul to that, you have a conscience. You've learned from mistakes, and you don't want to perform those bad mistakes again. And you got to figure out how to live a life that is going to make you feel happy, and happy with this little voice that's in your head, which I don't know how many other people have it. I'm assuming most people do. And that's your intuition. So your intuition is connected to your unconscious. And Jung believed your unconscious had intelligence. And I believe that too. Your unconscious knows a lot more than your conscious self. And so if you tap into that through listening to your dreams, which is a big part of finding your soul, and also, having your deceased relatives come to you, they come to you fastest in dreams than any other way. You live more of the soul, which, as I say, is just a kinder way. So with ego, you have more fear. And so when you're driven by fear, we all know what that's like. You're just in survival, and you're just trying to grab your way up the ladder no matter what happens. And with the soul, you're trying to find people that you can work with and complement and cooperate with. And you don't see cooperation as weakness.
Thank you. I appreciate you diving into that. And it's interesting. I found this so fascinating. In your book, you talk about how the soul begins to grow.
Yes.
And I really felt that was very interesting. And a lot of people don't talk about that.
Well, they don't know about it, right? Because you have to read a lot of these books to delve into this stuff. So anyway, the soul is in utero. There is an atom placed in utero, and that is your spiritual body, and your physical body goes around that. And as you are growing physically, your spiritual body is growing, so that it is a little miniature of you. In my book, I have the spiritual centers that are located in the physical body that are actually spiritual centers. So your soul is contained in your solar plexus. And you can see as you go up the channel, which is the vagus nerve, and silver cord is attached to that, which takes you out of your body. Now, how is that possible that you leave this physical body and you have another body? Well, it's an ethereal body. It's made up of atoms and protons and neurons and chemicals. And I don't have a combination of that. I've just read that, but it makes sense. And they say that when your spiritual body is going to leave your physical body, your body changes direction around the ears, and then something happens and rotation changes, and this vagus nerve becomes a channel. So how would that happen? Well, your whole body vibrates, and vibration causes structure. And then this etheric body, which is not controlled by gravity, goes up this channel that is made in the middle of your body by the vagus nerve and the silver cord at the top, where you leave the top of your head. That's the general way. You can also leave, if you're laying down, you can leave like your whole spiritual body comes out, apparently, of your physical body. So they give a couple kinds of illustrations there. But you go out the top of your head, and your silver cord is attached to your physical body. So as your etheric body or spiritual body is floating around up there, meeting your relatives or seeing the light or flowers or all the beautiful smells, whatever you're doing, you're still getting oxygen from your physical body. And there was a book called After, which was just published last year by Bruce Grayson, who's an expert in near-death experiences. And he stated in there that any near-deathers that they were researching that left their body and went to the other side, their oxygen level either remained the same or got stronger. So you have an oxygen level that is coming from your physical body as you go up there. Now, the silver cord, once that cut, you are deceased. If you're just going up there for a near-death experience, which means because you came from trauma, you have ability to disassociate easier. So in a car accident or on a cardiac table in the hospital, you just leave your body while they're doing all this stuff to you. And you can see, your physical body down there, but you feel so free. And you want to tell them, hey, it's okay. I'm all right up here. But nobody can hear you because a spirit is a person with no body. They can't talk. The only thing they can do is send you thoughts. And if they have good energy about their spiritual body, they can come into you in a dream and show you their face or their body, however much energy they have. They can appear in your family room. They can do that if they have good energy. But it takes them time when they die and go to the other side to be able to have that ability to appear to you. You have to have defense mechanisms because the ego requires it. And really, that's what you do in therapy. You're breaking down those defense mechanisms. One of the things I didn't put on that list first is denial, which I thought, Karen, you didn't list denial. But of course, coming from an alcoholic home, I know that is the first defense mechanism that especially alcoholics use. But everybody uses denial, right? And so you deny certain things. Okay, so then when you're in here talking to me about how, well, like I had one client once who came in June and she was exhausted because she just made turkey and mashed potatoes and sweet potatoes and cranberry sauce and pumpkin pie. And I said, oh, so you made Thanksgiving dinner? She said, no, I didn't. I said, don't you have that for Thanksgiving dinner? Well, yeah. And I said, you just made that on a June day. So that's denial, right? No, I didn't make a Thanksgiving dinner. But then when I say, but you did, oh my God. So when I say, so what happened at Thanksgiving in your family? So then we start talking about Thanksgivings. And we find out eventually that she was incested on Thanksgiving. So defense mechanisms are needed for people to keep all that tidy in their unconscious until they come to a therapist and they really are so miserable, as Alcoholics Anonymous says, you've hit bottom because you can't live the way you're living. And many times you don't know why you can't, but you just can't, and you want it to be different. So we need defense mechanisms. Now, the whole purpose of knowing what they are is knowing that you have to give them up with somebody you can trust anyway.
Well, it's really important is to have somebody that you can openly talk about. And I so appreciate you because having these types of discussions, a lot of times people are not really comfortable in expressing maybe what's gone on with them. They may be able to talk about the physical stuff, but when we get into the spiritual stuff, they're not quite sure how to sometimes, like, who's safe to verbalize that with.
Yes. Well, that's it. They have to get to know you. You have to get to know them. And I always tell them this is a relationship that we're going to have here. I had a client once, a young man. He was 29. He came in, he was scared to death. Of course, men don't like coming to therapy. But anyway, he'd broken up with his girlfriend, and he heard that I helped with relationships. So that's what he was here for. And he came from an alcoholic family where his father still drank. So I took, the usual assessment, and I noticed that I said, you seem very, I said, it's not comfortable to come to a therapist, but you seem very afraid. And is there something you're not telling me? Oh, no, no, no. So, okay. So anyway, when he came back the next time, he was just as afraid, and he had done his homework and all that. So I knew he was committed. So I said to him, I had a portable computer because I type 100 words a minute, and I get down everything they say, especially the first 6 sessions, because it's so important. So he says, I said, there's something you're not telling me. And I've never done this again. He was the only one I did it to. And he said, yeah. He said, but I told my priest, and he told me never to tell anybody. I said, really? Why was that? Well, because people will think you're crazy. I said, well, I'm qualified to tell you whether you're crazy or not. So, and you don't look crazy to me. Because people that are crazy, guess what? They're not worried that they're crazy. You laugh. So anyway, I said, so tell me, because I've heard a lot of weird stuff. You wouldn't believe what I've heard in here. And I had just had, this is like a year after I'd had my, breath. And so he said, one night, he said, he got home from late at work, 10 o'clock, I guess. And his father was always up in the kitchen drinking. And he said, we always fight. But this night, there was a chopping block of knives in front of him. And he got so mad at me that he threw this knife at me. And he said exactly what William James said they would say when they have a spiritual experience. I don't have the words to explain this to you, and you're going to think I'm crazy when I do. But this sheet that was like plexiglass, but it wasn't plexiglass, came down in front of me, and the knife bounced off of it. And so I said, oh, okay. So I said, well, you had a spiritual experience. He just looked at me, and I said, lots of people have had them. But I said, your priest is right, and you can't tell everybody that story. But you could tell people that really, understand that it had different kinds of spiritual experience, because it's different for everybody usually. Now, I said, if you're really interested in that, I can give you a bibliography of books that would help you. But you're 29. I don't know that you came here for that, but you could always have that. But number one, we can't guarantee if you fight with your father again and he throws another knife that force field is going to come down in front of you. We can't guarantee that. So you cannot fight with him in the kitchen. Eat somewhere before you go home, or go to your room and have a sandwich, whatever. Do not argue with him in the kitchen. Yeah, he said, I know. And it's a spiritual experience, and it's supposed to, and someday when you're older, it may help you realize that there is a higher power of whatever kind, that you want to believe in. But that was a spiritual experience, and you are not crazy. And again, and I said to him, before I said that, I said, if you're afraid of something and you don't tell me, you and I are going to have a relationship here. If we're going to dive into why this relationship with your girlfriend didn't last. So you and I are going to have to trust each other. Oh, he says. So then he told me.
Well, that's absolutely remarkable, because there are so many people that have these types of experiences, not necessarily with the knives, but you look at this and you're like, oh my gosh. And a lot of times they do think, if I tell anyone, they're going to get me a padded room. So
that's right.
I don't need a reservation for that place.
No. I got enough problems just dealing with my alcoholic father and my job and my girlfriend.
And we don't need to compound it now, right?
That's right.
But it must have brought him so much comfort to be able to tell that story, have somebody hear and understand him, and also, be at a place where it's like, okay, well, this is what this is. And when you're ready, you can kind of dive into it more.
Just like when they go to a medium and they come back, like William James said, you want to know what it's like to go to a medium? Go to one. And William James, why did he go to a medium? He and his wife lost an 18-month-old baby. I mean, I can't imagine the grief of losing an 18-month-old baby, right? And his wife wanted to know where her baby was. And that's how he got interested in studying mediums. But when you're in social work school, guess what? They don't talk to you about William James's work with mediums. They talk to you about the psychology books he wrote, which is wonderful. I mean, he was the father of American psychology. He wrote the first 2 books on it and took him 12 years. But that's not all that he's known for. And he called mediums mental healers. And he and his colleagues studied them. And so Carl Jung's mother was a psychic. And he said, my mother was a good mother, except there were times when she would come out with stuff that didn't have anything to do with the conversation. And then his grandfather had a second wife, and he and the second wife at lunch would talk to his first wife on the other side. So, I mean, Jung had to be interested in psychology because all of these different consciousnesses were going on in his house and with his relatives. And he had many, I don't know how many ministers in his family, maybe 8. That's a lot of ministers. And they're all Swiss Protestant and wear black and don't smile. So he was trying to figure out, my mother, she was psychic. And for his PhD thesis, he went to a medium every Tuesday for 2 years. And that's what his thesis was on. Now, they don't tell you that when you study Jung either, that he studied mediums. So what I'm about right now is, number one, I teach other therapists on the internet. I don't do it as much as I would like to do it, but that's fun. And they write to me and say, Karen, many therapists have these abilities, psychic abilities, but they can't use them because they'll be taken to the psych ward. So anyway, it's, you validate people no matter what group you're talking to, but it's so important that people know that these things do happen and that they are real, and that what we have done by separating that from the medical model is that we have really hurt people, because it would be good if, people in the medical model could understand that these things can and do happen. And we need to have therapists that understand the difference between, somebody who is psychotic and somebody who's having a spiritual experience. And the main difference would be that someone who is psychotic is inflated. So they're talking to Jesus or whoever, and they going on and on and on about this. And somebody who had a spiritual experience is humbled because they have just felt the awe and the, vastness of that spiritual experience. And the person who's had the spiritual experience can come in and out of that story at any time and tell you the story. The person who is psychotic cannot do that. They will tell you a different story each time, or come, they just can't keep it together because it is psychosis. So now that's not saying that somebody in psychosis couldn't be having a spiritual experience, but it would be the part that he or she could stay with. That would be the spiritual part.
Oh, that's absolutely fascinating. I know for a lot of people, as we talk about this and as they experience their own, personal awakening, having that, looking at the full body with body, mind, and spirit, as opposed to, hey, we're just going to look at the body and the mind over here and spirit, good luck with that over there.
Right.
I mean, we're not treating, as you said, like the whole person, and we're really doing so many people such a disservice.
Yes.
In your book, you talk about family stories. So how does our family story impact our soul's growth?
Okay, so we're going to use my story just because that's the easiest right now. So I was raised in an alcoholic home, the oldest of 3 children. I had 2 brothers that were 11 months apart. They were 4.5 and 5.5 years younger than I was. They were called the, Irish twins. So I watched my mother, who was very resourceful, very creative. She had her own sewing business in the home, and she needed it because my father, when he would come home, would sometimes have not the paycheck, that he had been given at work. And now he was a truck driver, and he worked for this company in Albany. He would drive to New York City and back. So that was just, an overnight. And then he also would go to Maryland. And in Maryland, you had to stay. So he had a room in a boarding house there, right? So he would come do 2 days and then come home. And when you're a kid living in an alcoholic home, you kind of wish he'd go to Maryland more so they wouldn't be home. Because, of course, when he was home, there's always fighting. It's constant in an alcoholic home, usually. unless the spouse is going to Al-Anon, which I strongly recommend. But anyway, so you're raised knowing that this guy can barely stand up when he gets home, and sometimes when you're eating dinner, his face is almost falling in the plate. But your mother said, "That's your father. You have to listen to him." Why do I have to listen to him? So I was always that kind of kid. I don't think so. Now my father got not sober. He got dry when I was like maybe 11, 12. So then he didn't drink, but he didn't go to Alcoholics Anonymous. So he was dry, meaning he had the same personality. He just didn't drink. So she said, "We'll have to ask your father." And I'm thinking, why? What is wrong with you? Right? But then I realized that now, of course, that she was codependent, that her whole life depended on how she saved this marriage and kept it going because she was afraid to live by herself. So my model then was, I'm never going to be like my mother. So I get married to my high school sweetheart, and he goes in the Navy, and I go to California, and we have 2 girls. And I realized that he's just not. I tell this story in the book. He's just so passive and quiet, and I'm thinking, oh my God, this guy is depressed. I didn't know anything about psychology then. I can't do this because I got 2 girls. Now I got him, and I was working, 36 hours in a day, and I can't do this because he's not helping me. That was my perception. So then, of course, I get married to my boss, second marriage, and he is an alcoholic. So that is how I repeated it, right? And of course, I never wanted to marry an alcoholic. Now, why would you do that? If you know what alcoholism looks like, why would you marry one? Well, because they don't all look the same. Because my father stayed in the bar and didn't get home till like 3:00 in the afternoon when he's supposed to be home at like 8 in the morning. And my second husband, he worked for a 3-lettered company. He got home at 6:00 every night and went straight to the bar in the house. And don't get in his way. But he was in sales. And so in the beginning, it was like, well, in sales, you have to drink a little bit. Yeah, right. Okay. Until a few years later, I realized what I'd gotten myself into. And so then every time I sounded like or acted like or thought like my mother, I went to therapy because my rule was I am never going to be like my mother. So that's how I raised myself, as an adult. And then eventually, this alcoholic marriage, I had a 3rd daughter, and then I kept arguing with him. Now I try to argue with him when he wasn't drinking, which didn't always work. So one night we're arguing. When you argue with an alcoholic who's drinking, their eyes are not even with you. So this one night he stops right in the middle of this argument and says, "Look, I'm going to tell you something. And if you repeat this, I will deny it. But you, I can live without. Alcohol, I can't." So I thought, oh my God, he's really awake. And I felt like I'd been slapped, but also it was like a dawning of, that's my biggest fear. My biggest fear was he was going to choose alcohol over me. And of course, Al-Anon will tell you that the women that go there, they kept trying and trying. One more time, I'll talk to him. One more time. Why? Well, because you got married because you wanted to be married. So, but anyway, I thought, I got to get out of this because this is why my mother stayed. So anyway, it took 2 years. I created a plan, and it took 2 years to divorce him too, because alcoholics don't like to be left because they don't want to be alone. They just want somebody there that should always take care of them and take their abuse, and that, because they don't see it as abuse. They just see it. That's the way I am, and I'm not changing. That's an alcoholic's statement. And they're never going to therapy. Or if they go to therapy, they either charm the therapist, because guess what? When they're not drinking, they're very charming people. And I don't see why you're having such a problem. Well, he drinks. So you have to have somebody that really understands the disease concept of addiction to understand if you're going to go to a therapist, that to understand what you're living with. And then you need to get to Al-Anon. He needs to get to AA. And I say he because in America, there's more male alcoholics than female. So that's the usual that you see in the office. Although women do drink and they are alcoholic, and they usually are a little sneakier about it. They get the drinks at 7-Eleven, put vodka in there, and they're sipping that all day. So you don't know. They're not going to your bar at 6 o'clock at night and don't get in my way. They drink differently. But anyway, so that was why I kept going to therapy, because of course nobody in my family would go to therapy, And my father, the alcoholic, when I got my master's degree, I drove up to Albany. I was living in New Jersey, like I am now, and I had 2 daughters still at home with me. I took them up there. I was exhausted. I thought my brain was so tired, I'll never read another book in my life. And I get up there, and you walk in the house, and he's sitting in the kitchen in the chair, and he says, "Well, I am so glad that what I taught you in your life helped you get a master's degree." So that is the ego of the alcoholic. And I said, "Yeah, that's true." I was just so tired.
Wow.
I thought, we'll just go with that. Because if that's what you're going to hang your hat on, yeah, you really did teach me a lot. And then Rutgers finished it for me.
Oh. Well, I'm so sorry you went through that, but it sounds like your life experiences have really brought you to the place where you are now, where you've been able to help so many people.
Yes, I have. And I want to help more. I really want to get the word out to those other therapists that we have 2 bodies, and everybody, you have 2 bodies. Do you know that? And they just stare at you. No, they don't know that. But you do. And, and it's not just near death people. People say, when they're in childbirth, they have had these kinds of experiences where they floated above their body. Well, anytime you're floating, you're in your astral body. So I just want people to know that, because I know there's all these different kinds of floating experiences that people have. And that was your astral body. Then somehow you got back into your physical body. So how does that happen? It's because I had a gentleman who, the doorknob issue one day when he left, he stood up and he said, now he was here for relationship problems. Sometimes I leave my physical body, and what I'm afraid of is I can't get back in. Now, nobody taught me that in social work school, and I hadn't gone for my doctorate yet. And I'm thinking, so I said, well, how do you usually get back in? He says, well, I just think about it and I'm back in. And that is how you get back in. Your thoughts, when you're in your astral body and you're a spirit, thoughts count. Thoughts are everything. And really they are in this world too, because what are we doing when we're doing affirmations, right? We're changing our thoughts to be positive, right? But thoughts are what move you around in the spirit world. So I want to teach that to other therapists. I want to teach it to as many people as I can. I was on another podcast a couple months ago, and somebody sent a nice comment. "Oh, you were on that podcast," and I read in her emails that somebody said you were a great therapist. Yeah, okay, well that's nice. I said, but do you know that you have 2 bodies? That's what counts. 2 bodies. I want you to remember that. So that's my soapbox right now.
Well, I'm glad that you shared that with us, because there's so much to just, we're just not taking care of one body. You're right. We've got the 2 bodies.
Right.
What do you find is a place where people kind of get hung up on when they look at maybe self-care or, taking care of both bodies?
Well, number one, most people don't think they have 2. So with that, that's going to be a big step if we get there. Most people are into fear, the ego word. They have OCD, they have anxiety, they have panic attacks, and they're into so much fear. Now, what a panic attack is, I think, is all that stuff that you've pushed down in your unconscious coming up to your consciousness because something's triggered it, maybe just a license plate as you're driving along, and you can't breathe. Well, so I say, if that's a lot of material that's coming from your unconscious to your consciousness, and it feels like it's coming through a garden hose, what you need is a fireman's hose to let that come up. So you need to have to breathe. Pull over the side of the road and breathe this vagus breath, because you've got to calm down this vagus nerve. And that's a big thing that people need to know. And Darwin in the 1790s, I think it was, founded this nerve, and he called it the pneumogastric nerve, which is the vagus nerve now. And he said that your stomach tells your brain something and your heart rate goes up, which is exactly what happens. But see, that's post-traumatic stress. So if I'm a soldier and I hear a car backfire, my stomach gets upset, tells the brain danger, danger, and my heart rate goes up. So that's why I really got interested in the vagus nerve first. It wasn't about spirituality and how you leave your body. It was, oh, my clients have to have this nerve in their body, and I have a big poster of it in my office, so I can show you how long this nerve is. Because if you go to an anatomy book, it just shows you at the neck, vagus. But this nerve comes in at the top of your head and goes down around your neck, around your amygdala, which is fight, flight, or frozen. And I can explain frozen in a minute if you want. And then down your spinal column, into your heart, and into your stomach. It affects every organ in your body, really. And so fear and how to calm down the fear. And everybody thinks they're so unique with their fear. Or now they have a name for it. Oh, I'm OCD. I'm going to have this the rest of my life. Really? You really have to have that the rest of your life? Why can't you we'll write down the thoughts you have, we'll do behavioral therapy, and we'll get you out of this, fear-laden place? Because now with COVID, there's a lot of people that aren't leaving their house, right? Because it's scary out there. Well, you're going to have to learn to live with COVID because COVID's here, right? So we're going to have to handle this fear. Well, then that's what makes them special in their house. So the whole household many times is now trying to help this person. And so they're all living with, coming in, washing their hands, using Purell all the time, whatever they have to do to make this person feel safe. So then the person can just stay there. And sometimes that's the only attention they've ever gotten, is being afraid and knowing, oh my God, somebody help me. Well, their parents probably didn't, because that's why they're so afraid now. So it's really fear and anxiety and panic that I see stops people from even thinking, oh yeah, well, I can pray and I pray to God, but nothing happens. Well, because you don't really believe that something could happen. And the law of attraction means you have to think positively for something to happen. You have to say, today, how many times am I going to write down an affirmation that will stop this fear? And then maybe I'll go for a walk in my neighborhood. Maybe I'll drive to the supermarket and have them load the groceries in the car, because then I'll see another person. So that's my answer to that.
Yeah, just taking those steps are so important. And so thank you for going over that. I got to tell you, I was checking out your website because I love doing that with the people I'm going to be talking with. And you've got these amazing webinars coming up. So is that open to the public, or is this for people who are more clinical?
Oh, well, it's for clinical people to get CEUs, but anybody can go on there.
Yeah, because I love the soul through time and space. I mean, I think I'm going to be attending that one. So,
Okay,
good. You got my interest right there. Or please tell me I'm not crazy. An ethical response, to clients processing near death and other spiritual experiences. Wow. I mean, how empowering would that be?
Yes. And many times, when I give lots of associations that help you with all those things, and so you can go out further and you can get more books and you can attend some of these meetings. Now, some of them with COVID, you don't have, actual meetings, but you can attend them on Zoom. So Zoom has been a wonderful thing for those people.
My goodness, what a great resource. Well, Karen, where can our listeners connect with you and learn more about your work and of course, your books, your webinars, and be part of your community?
Well, of course, they can go on my website like you did, which is KarenEHerrick.com. And they can also just email me, Karen@KarenHerrick.com, because I do answer emails. Keep it to one page, and I'll get back to you with whatever your problem is, and try to help you, wherever you are, because there's organizations everywhere that really want to, help you. So you're not alone. And also, I want people to know that they're not alone when they die, because there's been so much grief with this COVID stuff that, nobody was with them. Their loved ones from the other side were with them, and angels and spiritual guides were with them. I guarantee you, from everything I've ever read, I bet my practice on it. And on the stories that come back, from the near-death people and the out-of-body people. So nobody dies alone. I want you to know that. what happens when somebody is thinking about, dying, or their body is breaking down, is their ancestors up there get the call. Now, don't ask me how, except I know it's somehow connected to the unconscious, that people up there realize, oh, Judy's about to do it. She's about to come up here. And so many times they will be visiting them. And you'll see that if you go to a nursing home. Sometimes I had a friend who went with another friend who were visiting her mother, and her mother said, well, you have to leave at 3 because Daddy comes in and visits me at 3. And so they left, and the friend of my friend said, isn't that nuts that we got to leave at 3? She thinks Dad comes in, and my friend, who is spiritual, said, no, Dad does come in at 3 because she's already connected to him, so that when she goes up to the other side, he's going to be meeting her. And so we hear these stories, and then like that gal that would have left, if my friend hadn't been with her, she would have thought, oh, what a nutty mother I have, right? And not understand that this whole system is one of love. And that's really what is the attraction of having that spirit connection. And so if you want to go to a medium and hear about your loved one, if they love you and you love them, somebody you love is going to come in. And you don't die alone. That's because that causes so much grief for people and abandonment feelings,
Well, Karen, I mean, my goodness, we just have had such a phenomenal time with you. Thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
Well, you're entirely welcome, and it was my pleasure.
Well, thank you, Dr. Herrick. It's been such an honor to spend this time with you and to talk about your book, Psychology of the Soul and the Paranormal. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I would like to thank everyone for tuning in. You've been listening to Moments with Marianne, where we make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.